Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Steps podcast. I'm Lou, and I am delighted to be hosting this podcast. This is a space where we share our experiences and reflections of entering into the Steps process. Steps, if you don't know, is a 12-week journey towards freedom, which is based on the well-known 12-step process, and this one is centered on the Christian faith. We often assume that 12-step programs are only for people with obvious addictions such as drugs and alcohol, but here we reveal how using these 12 steps can bring about profound hope and change at a personal level, no matter what addiction, behaviour or thought pattern is holding us back. Every episode, we share and reflect on the raw and unfiltered personal journeys of three participants, Jamie, Lars and me, Lou. We share how we began, grew and are still very much growing in this journey towards inner peace and freedom. In this episode, we are at step 7, where we humbly asked God to remove our shortcomings, which feels like a significant step. Jamie, how did you find coming to step 7?
I remember the first time I realized it was a prayer. I'd missed that it's humbly asking. So I think it was probably, to be honest with you, I think it was the third time I did it, where someone in a reflection during the breakout group said, it's a prayer. I thought, it's a prayer. And that really impacted me because it reminded me that step 7 is just getting more specific. It's like step 1. There's that humility, that powerlessness, the hope of step 2. And it's actually asking God, and God's the one who's going to be doing the heavy lifting. Whereas I think when I first approached step 7, I thought, okay, I'm going to work now. I'm going to be doing some change.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lars, how about you?
Well, I absolutely love step 7. And I actually did from the start. And I think it's because I previously, before I encountered the steps process, went through another process in my life where I really had an experience of God being my heavenly Father and me being the little one, which really helped me. Until that point, until that experience, my feeling was I have to fix everything. I have to keep everything going. And it was really a hard, stressful way of living my life. But after that encounter, after that experience, it really, really changed. It was a different way of living my life. And I simply loved it. I remember having a period of 6 months where I felt just happy all the time, which is, when do you ever do experience that? So it had such a powerful effect on me. And when I encountered step 7, for me, that was in a way that was what it was about. It was about leaving it with God, all those things that I can't really figure out myself. And it was a gateway for me to connect with, you could say, the spirituality of being the little one.
Interesting, because I really resonate with what you say now, but I think at the time, and actually, to be honest, whenever I do step 7, I do have a bit of an internal battle of keeping control. And for me, the idea of kind of giving up control is definitely appealing, and I'm kind of like, kind of a bit excited about it, but also I kind of have these thoughts like, actually, is it safe to do that? Can I trust you, God? I felt so kind of immersed in my pride and needing to keep up appearances. Actually, it felt quite frightening to be just handing it over to God, because I guess if I'm honest, there's a part of me that's like, will you come through for me? And now looking back, I can see that every time he has, but it's like that feeling, and that the thought comes to my mind, what if, when I get to this step? And there's an element of giving up control, isn't there? And
totally. I do really identify with what you're saying as well. I think it's interesting how you can have so mixed emotions at the same time. You can have complete joy over a thing, and then at the same time feel all of what you are expressing so well. So I totally identify, and I feel like I need step 7 every time I come to step 7, which says a little bit about, all right, so it's worn out a little bit, the whole thing about being the little one. And again, I need to surrender to living in that place of surrender, of not having to fix everything myself. So yeah, so I totally identify with what you're saying there. And I think it's human condition in a way, isn't it? That we are somehow so taught that we need to create our own happiness, pursue our own happiness, fix our own lives. We are being told in 1,000 ways just throughout a normal day. So I think there are good reasons why we need to be reminded, at least I need to be reminded again and again and again. I think it's one of the reasons why I think I have to go through steps quite intentionally once a year, at least, to just, for my part, stay really sharp on these things.
I think actually step 7 began to enter into some of the stuff, Lars, you're talking about, when I realized that what was driving the behavior and causing the behavior was pride. It was actually a really celebratory moment for me, because over responsibility felt in many ways like it was being loving and good to people and a good servant of people. But when I suddenly realized that actually this idea that I'm at the center of the universe, keeping myself safe, and that was pride, that was it. Okay, this sounds like it's such an ugly word, but it was such a revelation to me that was driving it. And when I then saw that, I think I experienced, I think something that you said, Lars, that this pride was everywhere and it was in my bones. And when I realized it was in my bones, it was the way I saw myself, the way I saw circumstances, the way I saw people. I suddenly was impacted by a genuine sense of powerlessness, because something that is so pervasive in my bones, I can't deal with that. Maybe I could modify over apologizing, and maybe I could modify placating and pleasing and perfecting. I could probably put a lid on that, but something that's in the very core of the way I see myself, how do you even begin to touch something that's in your bones? And I think that's when, yeah, it's a prayer. God, would you remove the illusion that I'm the center of the universe and that I'm keeping myself safe? I'm going to need you to do that, because literally I'm powerless over this thing. I'm coming to you in humility, and I'm coming to you in the expectation of hope that you are going to help me.
I think it's really hard to get the balance with this, because I totally hear that, when it feels so pervasive, like, oh, there's nothing else I can do, God, you've got to take over. I would definitely say that I've struggled on this step with the pride, because I being someone who has struggled with low self-worth, it's easy for that to then become something that I then like, oh, I'm so bad because I'm so proud. I have pride. And I definitely found, even when I was thinking about replacement strategies in step 7, I would often, the replacement strategies, sometimes if I wasn't careful, I'd then be really hard on myself and kind of pile these kind of new demands of myself to try and kind of placate the side of me that was feeling, I guess, ashamed of the pride. But I think what really helped me was knowing that I was coming to a God who was just so compassionate and loving. And actually, I guess, like Lars was saying, being the little one, actually, I can't do this. And, even my perspective on it is flawed. So God, you do what you need to do, because it's too much for me and myself. And that process of kind of almost giving over the layers of kind of shame in the pride was really releasing to me.
And I think that's where, like you're saying, that the steps become like an operating system, because once I'd done it a few times, I realized actually to deal with pride, I couldn't go to judgment without mercy. because that was now an illegitimate way of dealing with dysfunctional behavior. Because I'd been through the process, I understood that I would need a spiritual connection, because that's where step 10, 11, and 12 is going to take us. So suddenly, once you've done it a few times, it becomes like the trellis, the operating system, the new culture to deal with these things in grace and inside the love of God.
Yes, and it's interesting, isn't it, how, I mean, I think we have talked about this before, how everything in the steps process is so connected, because in many ways we are now back with some of the things we were dealing with in step 1 and in step 2 in particular. In step 1, where it was the powerlessness, and we kind of really face that again now at step 7. We really can't make this on our own, and then in step 2, where we then talk about, for the first time in the process, our image of God. How does He relate to all of this? And there I trust in God, and who is He? How can I have a good concept of Him? And for some of us, I mean, we were just brought up with that, for better and for worse, because sometimes that was even rather flawed. And for others, it's kind of a whole new journey, isn't it? But I would say, though, that it is really good news, isn't it, that I'm not locked in without any avenue of help when I find myself facing this utter powerlessness. Just think about how sad it would be if there was no avenue of help, but there is one. So it's interesting, because part of me, I think, historically has been quite depressed around step 7, because I'm again facing the reality of this stuff going on in my life. But I feel like I am more and more leaning towards the joy side, and saying that, well, that's an opportunity then to encounter a greater one, a bigger one. And of course, in my personal experience, He is a reality. God is there, and as you say, Lou, He loves us, and there is mercy and grace to be had there.
I think also that it's like hearing you talk about that, it reminds me again of what you said earlier about how we need to be reminded of this, because we can so easily get bombarded with messages of like, it's all down to you, you've got to fix yourself, it's all about self-help. And actually, when we go into a process like this, it is wonderful news, isn't it, that it isn't down to us, that we can give this over to God and ask for His help, and He comes through for us. And I think sometimes I can go through this process and think, okay, right, that's it, fixed now, I can go on my way. But actually, we are all human and we are all fallible, and I'm just reminded that I need this process, and I need to be reminded of these truths. Otherwise, I just forget. I just, we can so easily get caught up in distraction. I can, just get on with life. And before I know it, I'm kind of back in a cycle of either hopelessness or behaviors that aren't healthy. And I'm kind of forgetting some of these truths that are just so important to remind us of.
Yeah, and I think the invitation of step 7 is the question, who am I without this? And if my emotional energy is not going on all this over responsibility, who am I going to discover that I am? If all my attention is on the invitation to be courageous and to accept the things I can't change, then what's going to fill this brand new capacity? That's a really exciting journey and exploration, I think, and to discover, wow, actually, how did you make me?
Absolutely. I so relate to that. And I think maybe that's also a bit hidden in the word we humbly prayed, because there is a whole biblical kind of narrative behind that word, where that comes from, that in a way it's linking us to the essence of who we are as human beings, at least in the biblical narrative, that on the one hand, God made us out of the dust of the earth, and if we look at that, we see the fragility of us. What could be more worthless than the dust of the earth, on the one hand? But then on the other hand, God took this form that he made out of the dust, and then he breathed his own life into it. And who can imagine something more powerful than the Spirit of God, the life of God himself? So it's really a paradox that we find as human beings here. And I think many of us, we kind of have a tendency to lean to either side. Either we need to be strong, we need to pull ourselves together, we need to get a grip, and we need to be on top of things. So we kind of go to the strength side, or we go to the other side and, oh, I can't do anything. I'm hopeless, a hopeless case, and I'm not worth anything. And then we are on the dust side of things. But this word humility, the humble prayer, actually combines the two. And I think it settles us as we grow in it in a way more balanced view of who we are as human beings, which way more reflect our experience of life, that we are both fragile, powerless, and in need of help on the one side, but we also carry the image of God within us. There is power there, which we also experience in the steps process, that we do have a power to change habits, to change behaviors, which is why step 6 and 7, they correspond so well with one another. So I really agree with what you're saying, Jamie, that our identity, our concept of ourselves is really at play here. And there's so much help to be had, actually, when we start seeing the balance of these things and allow them to reflect our image of ourselves, really.
So when we think about the kind of second part of that, the kind of habits and the things that we can change, let's get practical. Like, what kind of things have you chosen as a replacement strategy or new habits that you built when you did steps?
I think a really helpful habit for me is the practice of silence and being still, because it breaks the habit of analysis and rumination and overthinking. So in silence, I'm admitting I don't actually always know what to say. I don't know always what to pray, but I'm going to be still and recognize that God's with me and in me and near me. That's a really helpful practice.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One of my examples would be when I was working on pride. Part of that was judging myself and others without mercy. And I really did that. So I had this idea of simply doing a fast on judging others and myself, which was really, really interesting. I realized how much that had preoccupied my mind and my thought life. But I actually managed to do that for a period of 3 months. Every time a thought came to me about judging whatever I saw going on with someone else or myself, I immediately reacted against it and said, I'm not doing that. And it was such a relief. It was such a help in terms of balancing out something which had come out of balance in my life.
It's interesting because they say to form a habit, it takes around that time anyway. So in doing that, you kind of almost change the kind of your automatic thoughts. So then it becomes a longer term habit. One that I recently done is I think I hid behind, and I still do, I'm trying to change it now, but I've hidden behind I don't mind in a kind of, when someone asks what I want to do or what I want to eat, I will kind of not consider my preferences. Not every time, but sometimes I was doing it enough to realize actually that's a bit of a problem and I need to get in touch with what I want. So I've banished I don't mind from my dictionary. It doesn't work every time, but I think I'm building the awareness of when I'm doing it. And at that point where I want to say I don't mind, I'm thinking, no, what do I actually want? Even if I don't feel like I really mind, I'm making a choice, because it's building the kind of decision making and assertiveness kind of muscle. So that's a very practical one I've done. But I think as I said earlier, I always need to be careful on this, because I can also think, right, I need to change this, and this, and have all these different replacement strategies and new habits. And then I'm just setting myself up to fail because I'm trying to do too much. So I'm really trying to maybe pick one and master that one to the extent that I can, and then move on to something else.
I love that, Lou. And as you're saying it, I'm like, I would like you to be my habit coach to kind of help me out next time I go through a process. So in a way, it reminded me, also around this part of the process, it's good for us to have help from other experienced people who have done this before us. Because some of us are very good at the conceptual side of the process, and some of us are stronger when it comes to how do we actually do this. So I just rejoiced in your examples to say, and it reminded me of, well, this is another area of where we, in a healthy way, learn to reach out for help, hopefully, in the process.
That's such an important part of the process, isn't it? Because we can be so independent, like, this is my issue and I need to fix it. And one thing that I've really appreciated about being in a steps community and doing it in a group is that other people are hearing my reflections, and I can speak to them outside of the session on what's going on. And it's just so nice to be able to do it with other people and journey with other people. It can really, I think it's just a really powerful thing when someone else hears what you're saying. And yeah, like you say, Lars, being able to share habits and ask people to keep you accountable, and just show an interest and kind of be there at the other end of a phone is just such a blessing, has been such a blessing. Jamie, what has support looked like for you when you've done steps?
I think support has been really taking the opportunity to talk, actually, for me, Lars being my coach, or in the facilitating process, to reflect regularly, to be able to be really, really honest about the process, to be honest to another person about the fact that it's a really emotionally charged process, that in forming new habits, a new pathway, it's not always easy, and there's a lot of sometimes starting, stopping, going back to what soothed the pain, starting again. And it's really helpful to reflect and say, actually, I'm struggling here. What do I do here? How am I going to take this new pathway? I think hugely the biggest healing part of the process has been the reaching out, and the opportunity to be honest and say, actually, this is not going well, or this is not working, and to be able to say that was absolutely huge, because definitely I would say, as a very practical way, it really undermined the thing is, I'm taking responsibility for this. I'm going to sort this. I'm going to find the solutions. I'm going to present myself as strong. It really gave me tangible ways to move away from that.
Well, it's a practical demonstration of humility, isn't it? When you call someone up or speak to someone and say, actually, I'm finding this bit really hard. But then kind of on the flip side, when things are going well and, you know, we are engaging in new behaviors, or we have some kind of breakthrough, it's so nice to have someone to celebrate with. And I've often been kind of talking to someone in steps, and they said, hey, that's something to celebrate, that's really good, and I've not seen it. But it's in the kind of talking about it, it kind of builds our awareness, has built my awareness of like, oh, actually, you know, this is working. And we can forget that, can't we? Wow, I think it's been so good to talk about step 7. It is a really significant step, and it is one that we can really rejoice in, and I guess be comforted that we can be reminded of our powerlessness. And it's good news, because actually being in the place where we are the little one and we can let God take over is just such a wonderful thing, and a really important part of the process, and key to freedom in my experience. In step 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed, and we became willing to make amends to them all. So we will talk about that one next time. Jamie, why don't you say the serenity prayer as we finish?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Amen.
And